Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Monday, July 21st, 2025. Happy 1-year anniversary of the day that Joe Biden dropped out of the race and Kamala Harris became the presumptive nominee for the Democratic Party. It feels like so much has happened in just 1 year. Thinking back to where we were just a year ago, I left brunch on a Sunday. I was living in Washington, D.C., ran to my apartment, recorded that video and posted it. It was just such a whirlwind and honestly such an exhilarating election season. It's really interesting to see that now today we are 1 year later. Now, I'm also excited for a different reason. I have an interview later today that I'm going to be posting hopefully later tonight or tomorrow morning. It's with an elected official. It's going to be really exciting. And so before I actually do that interview, it's scheduled for 2:30 p.m. today. I'm going to actually be focusing on something entirely different about President Trump and about his approval rating. And so I want to reshift focus back to that. But if you can't tell, I might seem a little bit more excited than usual, and that's because I am. Now, the 2025 approval rating polls have been very different than the polls that we have seen under Donald Trump's first term back in 2017. And that's because, for the most part, Donald Trump's approval rating has remained a lot higher than where it was when he was first in office and first elected after the 2016 election. And for a while, that actually made some sense. In the 2024 presidential election, we saw the Republicans won on the national level by a larger margin than what they won by in 2016. After all, Donald Trump won the popular vote for the first time for the GOP since 2004, and all of the battleground states that voted for Donald Trump in 2024 voted by a larger margin than the 2016 election, with the exception of Georgia. Now, thinking about where we are now today, Donald Trump's approval rating had a bit longer of a honeymoon period, where it was remaining in the positive for about 2 months after he took the oath of office. But now today, we find that CBS shows a record low approval rating for Donald Trump and the highest net disapproval we have seen in quite some time, probably dating back all the way to Donald Trump's first term. CBS News released a new poll. They actually did this poll, seemingly, to talk about things such as prices and the way that the deportations are going across the country and the big, beautiful bill and provisions that existed within it, cuts to Medicaid and reassociation of how you actually qualify for government subsidies. All of these different things were polled here. But the top line here, I think, is the thing that is the most damning to Donald Trump and his administration, and it is largely around how many Americans approve of the job that Donald Trump is doing. And spoiler alert, it isn't as many as it was before. In fact, we have a general trend line here. CBS News and YouGov have done these polls since February, giving Donald Trump about 2 weeks to settle into office before they conducted their first poll of this second term. They found that about 53% of Americans overall approved of the job that Donald Trump is doing. Now, this was actually great news for the Trump administration. Even after he had been elected in 2016, he never saw numbers like these in the first term at any point over the 4 years. And so to start out with a 53% approval rating was actually a success for the Trump administration. But by the time we reached March, about 2 points was shaved off. By the end of March, an additional point. By mid-April, 3 more points. By end of April, 2 more points. And then now today, 3 more points, taking that approval rating number from 53 to 42. But it actually gets worse than this. It isn't just that the amount of people who approve of the job that Donald Trump is doing is going down. The amount of people who disapprove are going up as well. About 58% of voters disapprove of the way that Donald Trump is handling his job as president. That is significant. It's a negative 16 overall net that actually falls in line with the general trend line we have started to see amongst the poll aggregates. Things like Real Clear Politics and Nate Silver have put together these maps here to take a look, charts here rather, to see how Donald Trump's approval rating is really trending. Now, for the first time in a long time, we are seeing that the overall net in terms of approval is reaching negative double digits. Now, it has never reached that point throughout the entirety of this second term. But it seems as if we are just days away from that happening. And this CBS News poll doesn't make things any better. And I think it speaks to what we've seen thus far. The big, beautiful bill was unpopular. The American public didn't want it. And when you take a look at the provisions and how Americans really gauge, are Donald Trump's policies helping you? You'll find that only about 25% of Americans feel like Trump's policies have helped them, according to an AP NORSC poll. That matters. When a huge chunk of the country is waving a flag that says, we don't feel like what you're doing in DC is helping us, you fall into the same trap that presidents have done time and time again that have led them to an inevitable defeat in the midterm election after they were just elected, incumbent or not. And you can see that. When voters are asked, Do you approve or disapprove of the way that Donald Trump is handling the economy? 60% of voters disapprove. He has a higher approval rating on overall than he does on the economy, and this is the issue he ran on. Immigration, the second issue he ran on. The mass deportations now, that we would get rid of X, Y, and Z. Donald Trump made pledges and promises to all sections of the country, and a big one of them was immigration and immigration policy. 56% of this country says they disapprove of the job that Donald Trump is doing. 38% of the country says we are going in a very bad direction. 23% say somewhat bad. And in terms of how people gauge the economy, it's either very bad or fairly bad as the overwhelming majority of this nation. And thinking too, as you continue, handling the situation with Israel and Hamas, 57% disapprove. 56-44 on the situation with Iran. Looking at the way that people are viewing this administration, they also do in line say he's doing the things that he promised. 53% of voters say he's following through on what he promised. But a lot of them seem to have buyer's remorse. Not large swaths of voters, and I don't want to inflate this to say that this means Donald Trump and the Republican Party are doomed in every election that follows. But as of right now, they are certainly not in a good position. And I would much rather be a Democrat in the 26 midterms than a Republican, especially when you get numbers like these. When you see, do you think the Trump administration is focusing too much about the right amount or not enough on various items? You'll find on issues like cutting taxes, 42% say not enough. On deporting immigrants who are in the United States illegally, 51% say too much. The majority of this country is not aligned with Donald Trump. For instance, are Donald Trump's policies making you financially better off, about the same, financially worse off? If just a third of this country believes you're maintaining the status quo and 50% of this country believes you're making them worse off, it's wraps. That is not a good place to be. If this maintains itself, Republicans will get demolished in the midterms because people will vote exactly on the issues they voted on in the 24 election that actually benefited Trump back then that will not benefit him today. And this kind of explains Donald Trump being obsessed with the midterms is because he's surrounded by people who do actually have some level of political knowledge. They see the same polls that we analyze. A great one that I think has really been jarring for the Republican Party, that has been very interesting, that really is under-discussed, is Atlas Intel's poll. They were the most accurate pollster in 2020 and 2024. But what are they telling us? In terms of Donald Trump approval, negative 10% nationwide. It's better than CBS, but it certainly isn't good, and it's not trending in the right direction. But it gets worse for the GOP. When voters are asked about a generic ballot, you're going to find that they are going to back the Democratic Party way more than the Republican Party, according to, again, the pollster that got it right when it came down to the 2024 election. I know we have to do a lot of scrolling here, but I want you to actually see about the way that people view Donald Trump. And also, too, I mean, this is something we're going to gloss over, definitely worth discussing in the future. But in terms of how people perceive members of Donald Trump's cabinet, Marco Rubio, negative 12. Kash Patel, negative 19. RFK Jr., negative 21. Pete Hegseth, negative 23. Tulsi Gabbard, negative 20. Time and time again, you're going to find that it actually is Donald Trump, not his administration officials, that outruns the way that voters view him. But again, getting past this point, I want to get to the actual head-to-head generic ballot. 51 to 42.7. What is that? Roughly about an 8 to 9 point victory for the Democratic Party based on the generic ballot right now. An 8 to 9 point victory. And thinking about the different demographics that are giving Democrats that advantage, young voters are reverting back. Black voters are reverting back. A solid lead for Democrats amongst Hispanic voters and a narrowing and tightening of white voters across the country. And you're finding that. 62.3% of independents say, I'm voting for the Democrats in the next election. And of those who didn't vote in the 2024 election or voted third party, 71% say Democrat, just 6.2% say Republican. Just 6.2% say Republican. Now, looking at where people trust each political party, Democrats are outflanking the Republicans on everything but defense, crime, and taxes. Everything else, including immigration, Democrats do well on. So now thinking again about why Trump is obsessed and why he's doing these things in states like Texas, the Republican Party is rightfully terrified about where they stand today amongst the electorate. The numbers are not positive. They don't show that the American public loves mass deportation now. It doesn't even show that they like it. It's jarring for the GOP, I'm sure, to see numbers like these, but in many ways, it should be. Donald Trump's approval rating dropping to this low point isn't shocking to many people who I think consume daily amounts of news media, but the majority of the nation does not consume daily amounts of news media. Donald Trump does a lot of things that a lot of bipartisan commissions and courts and judges have said are unconstitutional or violate due process or whatever it might be. And if you were tuned in, chances are, the more tuned in that American voters are, you find it in polls, that the more they watch the news, the less they like Trump. The Republican response is the news is brainwashing them. But as people consume media, even Republican media, they're watching Breitbart in some cases too, especially on things like the Epstein files, voters are starting to sour on Trump, and now it has a much broader appeal to the nation at large. But the last thing here that I think too is really interesting. Now, this is an article from the Daily Beast, left-wing media outlet, absolutely, but the headline is correct. Trump's own pollster warns the GOP is sleepwalking into a midterm disaster. Now, who am I talking about? Well, if we can actually pull it up here, I guess we're not going to be able to, but you can find it on Politico. We talked about this just 2 days ago. Fabrizio Ward, what did they find in their poll? Well, what they found was that Donald Trump's swing districts that he won in the last election, were pretty even in terms of partisan composition in Congress. But Donald Trump won all of these 28 districts that they surveyed by a margin of roughly 4 points in the last election. Amongst the people who recall their vote, they asked voters, before we ask you any questions, how did you vote in the 2024 election? Trump won them by 4. Then they asked them follow-ups. Well, in the 26 midterms, how are you voting? Democrats win that by about 2. So that alone is already a 6-point shift, but becomes even more difficult for the GOP in thinking about their strategy and pathway to victory. Is that when asking voters, how excited are you to vote in the midterm elections from a scale of 1 to 10? Of the 67% of voters that said 10 out of 10, and this is actually a very standard understood phenomenon, that those who are in battleground districts or battleground states are often the highest turnout and the most excited to vote because they feel like their vote matters, yada, yada, yada. Again, talk about that in another video. The point is, though, 67% of these battleground district voters are 10 out of 10 excited to vote in the midterms, but guess what that margin is for the Democratic Party? If the at-large was 2 and the recalled 24 vote was Trump plus 4, you might be shocked to know the Democrats lead that electorate of 10 out of 10 excitement by 7 percentage points. That's an 11-point swing in about 6 months since the last election. Seriously. A year ago, Kamala Harris took to the top of the ticket, and the margin has shifted that much. And it is in moments like this that remind me a lot of the coverage I did in 2017, in 2018, in 2019 that ultimately led to Donald Trump's loss in 2020. What did we see? Donald Trump's approval rating was the biggest red flag the Republican Party should have been paying attention to from the very beginning. Because what did it usher in? A President Joe Biden and a 2018 midterm election that Democrats gained 40 seats from the GOP. 40 seats, 235 for the Democrats, 199 for the Republicans. It took until Joe Biden's midterm for Republicans to win back the House majority, and Democrats are on the verge of winning it yet again because voters are upset with Trump. Because voters are upset with the way that this administration is handling all the issues that they initially, at least the plurality of the nation did, trusted Donald Trump more than Kamala Harris, and now today they trust Democrats more. And Democrats are excited to turn out, and the general populace is souring on Trump in ways that have not been seen since the January 6th insurrection that left Donald Trump with a record low approval rating. Because if CBS News is correct, and the overall numbers here now show Trump at 58 to 42, and my honest take is that I think they're probably a little bit better than this, but marginally so. But a 58 to 42 margin reminds me a lot of those final polls of Donald Trump's first term. After the entirety of the Republican Party condemned his actions on January 6th, it seemed like there was no chance Donald Trump had any political future in politics, and the nation seemingly was recovering from the January 6th insurrection, his approval rating was about 40%. Disapproval, about 60%. So to be just 2 points off from that really puts things into perspective. It shows just how much the American public has a problem with what this administration is doing, and it is fascinating to see these trend lines really emerge in a very similar way they did in Trump 1. Except this time, it took about 3 months to 4 months longer to actually get there. So let's keep tracking. I haven't made a video on Trump's approval rating in quite some time, but I really wish that I had, because I think there is so much we can really unpack from it and a lot of electoral analysis that really is offered by it. People vote based on how well of a job they think the president is doing, and today that stands to be the most cataclysmic thing you could say to a Republican strategist looking to win in 2026. Because chances are where we are right now, it won't happen in the way that Republicans would have hoped for. And a lot of it comes down to one common denominator, and that is President Donald Trump. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the top left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video for you to watch, and then a playlist for my Trump administration analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.